nobody who wants to play it safe decides that they want to make a film. I mean, I knew enough to know it would be unlikely I was going to get my film made, but I didn't know enough to know just how ridiculous and unlikely it was. And I think because along the way I was so unwilling to compromise on anything, like people are like, this is great, but it needs to be white. This is great, but it can't be gay. This is great, but, and I just was like, no, this is exactly what I want to do. I will not compromise on anything or just not make it. And I remembered at that time, anytime like someone in LA heard about that, I definitely got that sort of almost like bless your heart kind of thing where they're just like, oh, you want to make this film? Wow, that's really, that's really ambitious or very brave. That luxury of total ignorance is maybe what was helpful. Like I think it's almost better not to know a lot about the industry when you're going for like a crazy dream like that. When I got the financing, the first thing I said was like, I just want to be clear, I'm directing this. Because in my head, it was like, no one's going to let me direct this. But then the thing that amazed me is I remember the financier being like, who could we get to direct this by you? It's not like, oh, let's get Oliver Stone to come direct this film. The thing I realized is that I could answer any question anyone asked me about my film. Like for me, directing is just about having a point of view, like having a very specific point of view and making choices and knowing, like being comfortable with the fact that you might not be right. Right. It's not like when I made choices, I was like, oh, I'm like, there's some things I'd be like, I'm sure I'm right. But most things I'm like, I don't know, but I feel strongly about this. You might as well bet on yourself because on some level, what I think people gravitate toward is a cohesive voice. You'd be shocked how much you know about your story. And I think that gives you a confidence. It's not like I figure out who the character is and then I write the story. It's like I maybe have like some clues to who they are as I'm writing, but as I'm writing, they start to reveal themselves to me. And there's a lot of false starts where I'm like writing and then I'm like, would she say that? And then I go back, it's like, no, right? Like, and then like, and at some point the character will take over because the character will get irritated if you put false things in their, like it just, you can feel it. It just doesn't feel right. Right. And you'll just have to get until you eventually are like, that's it. That's what it is. And so I think that's the thing I would say is, don't wait to get the voice completely right to write because that won't happen. Like even just knowing it's wrong is good because then you're like, the fact that you react was like, she would never say that. It's like, oh, well, then you must know something about what she might say, right? Like, so you want that. Don't worry about writing something to represent. Worry about telling something that's true for you. Like you don't want to think about writing for the audience. You want to think about writing the thing that feels truest to you, right? And again, I would go toward when you're writing, there will be a moment when you're writing where you emotionally feel something. And that's when you know. It's like, again, if you're writing and you don't emotionally feel anything, your audience is not going to feel anything either. So just keep going until you write that thing. You're like, oh, like the character just said this and this other character reacted this way. If that hits you, then you're on to like, stay there. And I think the key is you should try and tell the thing that feels truest and bravest to you. And that is the way you represent queer Asians well, because there's as many of those voices as there are us, right? And the more you do that, like I wrote this very specific story, and I'm incredibly happy how many different kinds of people relate to it. But yeah, I would say it's the more people like you tell your specific stories, then the more room there is for people to look at queer Asians, for example, and see the just sort of see the variation. I think every actor needs something different. I always try and get some rehearsal, which, I've never had the budget to get as much rehearsal as I'd like. So it's usually like some Skype sessions where we talk a few times about the character. And then I usually try and get a couple sessions with them the week before we're due to shoot, really asking them questions. So in character to get them to say things. And the goal is that, there's areas that, like, I don't want to tell them this is what you ate for breakfast. That's something that they should fill in, right? But they might say something where you're like, oh, that's like you might when someone be like, oh, okay, actually, but would Ellie do that? Because Ellie's kind of shy. Like, so you might, like, when they suddenly go like, oh, and then she would go do this, and you'd be like, okay, but would she? Because what about this? And then she's like, oh, and it's like this process where you're using the Socratic method, but it's helping the actor kind of start to, like, you know, sink into what you're looking for, because they have to do the really hard work, which is ultimately get to the place where they fill it with their vulnerability and their emotions, right? And that's not something I can do. Like, I have so much respect for actors because I could never do that. I don't think this is necessarily true for everyone, but for me, I have a massive fear of debt. Like, if I have debt, I cannot create. So I am someone who needs to, like, I'm just practical. So I don't think it's so bad to find something that you can do practically that isn't going to exhaust you, right? While you have some dream, if you're writing, like, I don't think it's bad. Or maybe you work super hard, save the money, and then you pursue that for a while and you let your bank balance just sort of do this for a while. Like, that's okay too, right? But I don't feel like I think a lot of people think if I am not full-time doing that thing and it's not paying me money, then I am not whatever it is. And I think if you go into it needing to be paid first, it's very, very hard then to not compromise your vision. As long as you haven't sold it, it's yours. You can do whatever you want. You can just say no to whatever you want. And I think that's important.